Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's Raising the Bar webinar on school completion. My name is Landry, Head of Account Success Management and proud team member with the Learning Bar, located in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Our presenters today are Dr. J. Douglas Willms, Landry, Karen Penny, and Mark Owens. Dr. Willms is co-founding author of PISA, Canadian Research Chair for the Canadian Research Institute for Social Policy, also known as CRISP, member of the U.S. Academy of Education and International Academy of Education, data expert, or as I like to say, guru, and proudly the Learning Bar CEO. Dr. Willms will share what research is telling us about the very important marker of school completion as it resides within Tell Them From Me and on a broader level. He will also be reintroducing the new and improved version of the thematic report on school completion. Next up will be myself, Landry, Head of Account Success Management. I will take us inside some of the other tools within Tell Them From Me that relate to school completion and review how to use them and provide a few highlights and key benefits. Finally, we will listen to and enjoy a presentation by Karen Penny and Mark Owens. Karen has been the Deputy Superintendent of Schools for Peace River School Division since 2009. She holds a Bachelor of Education degree and a Master's degree in Educational Administration. Throughout her 30-year career in education, she's developed a particular interest in changing high school programming to better meet the needs of high school students. We will also hear from Mark Owens, who is in his third year as principal of Peace River High School. He graduated from the University of Alberta in 2003 with a Bachelor of Education and a Bachelor of Physical Education. He has taught for his whole career in northwestern Alberta and completed his Master's of Education in Educational Leadership in 2012 from the University of Calgary. So without further delay, I will hand over the controls to Dr. Willms.
Welcome everyone, and thanks for attending the webinar. I'm going to talk about school completion in Canadian schools with an emphasis on the work we've done in the Learning Bar, but also bringing in some of the work that comes from our National Longitudinal Survey for Children and Youth conducted by Statistics Canada and some other research, PISA research, the Program of International Student Assessment, conducted by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. We start by saying that only about 3 out of every 4 Canadian students graduate from secondary school in the typical time frame, that is, graduating all the way through without having to finish a few years later with some kind of an upgrading certificate. Although you will see a completion rate of 75% in a number of publications, including this one by Michel Janos et al., you'll see, if you look at Statistics Canada data, the graduation rate looks much higher, and that's because they include students who later pursue adult education programs that lead to a diploma. This little boy is a young lad from Saskatchewan, my home province, and he's on his way home from the first day of school, and if the system doesn't change, it's the First Nations boy, if the system doesn't change, his chances of completing school on schedule are less than 40%. This graph looks very complicated, but I'll work you through it. The main goal here is to say what are all of the life course factors that lead to school completion. Starting here at birth, as you know, there are many prenatal and perinatal factors that lead to lower outcomes as children enter school. On this pathway here, we have a number of factors that we know from the National Longitudinal Survey are strongly related. Then we have the early years outcomes. These are the so-called readiness skills, although we like to think of school readiness as being ready child, ready schools, and ready families and communities. Then we have this critical transition that I call the transition from learning to read to reading to learn, which for most children happens by about age 9. So learning to read then is related to academic achievement, of course, and also engagement, and I'll talk about 3 different kinds of engagement that we use in our Learning Bar schema, and then children's physical and mental health. Those factors are all related to school completion. So I'm going to talk next about personal assets leading to school completion. So in those 3 big pieces that I mentioned, academic skills, engagement, and physical mental health, we can think of a number of assets that children acquire or don't acquire as they're making their way through school. includes demographic, academic, engagement, mental health, as well as the learning climate of the school. So we can take all of those assets then and develop a prediction model based on these, what we call leading indicators of school completion. And so we have 5 or 6 large-scale studies that we know how to weight these various assets, and we can also look at their relationships to various outcomes within the Tell 'em From Me system. Last year we had almost 500,000 students. In fact, if we include Australia, that just came in with close to 200 schools, we would have surpassed 500,000, but close to 500,000 students in Canada did the Tell 'em From Me survey. So we can look at a prediction model and say, what is the probability, given a child's results on those various assets related to school completion, what is the likelihood that they're going to complete school on schedule? And you can see there's a number of children that have less than a 50% chance of completing school. How many? About 9% of the population. We say they're at high risk. Then we've got another group that are moderately at risk, roughly about 14% of the population, which have a probability of less than 70% but more than 50%. And then finally, those with a probability of school completion of more than 70%. We'd say they're low risk. They're most likely going to graduate. We can also, the kind of work that leads to that prediction model is based on a regression model. It kind of, I think of it as cutting the data sideways and saying this factor, school completion, is related to these various risk and protective factors. But we can also conduct another type of analysis, which we call cluster analysis. There's various techniques of cluster analysis, and say, how do students group into various groups? What I did was I took academic achievement, and we measure students' grades, and I put it on a 10-point scale. I took each of the 3 aspects of engagement and put them on a 10-point scale, and then mental health, which included anxiety, depression, or we'd say not anxious, not depressed, and high self-esteem, and put them on those 3 together in one factor on a 10-point scale. One group of students, which is about 1/3 of the Canadian population, are what we call engaged students. They're high on everything, maybe a little bit low on social engagement, but generally high on everything. 8.6 would be kids with an A grade. Then we've also got a second group, which is about 17% of the population. They're high on grades, almost as high as that first group, high in institutional engagement. They know schooling is important to their long-term outcomes, and not so bad on intellectual engagement either. But they have very low social engagement. They don't make friends easily at school. They're not participating in school activities, and they don't have a sense of belonging at school. These students also have a very high prevalence of anxiety and depression, and thus you see the low score on mental health. Michel Janos, who did really the pioneering work on this in Quebec with a longitudinal study of several hundred students in Quebec, calls this group the quiets. The quiets in that they got high grades, go to class every day, do their homework, well behaved, but really they're suffering in many ways. Disengaged students, about 1/4 of Canadian students. You can see the grades are following sort of from the A level down just into the B level, if you will. Low social engagement and low intellectual engagement, but okay on the mental health side. Then we have, if you'd add these two together, 19 and 7, about 26%, those would be basically your poor readers, or kids who did not make that transition from learning to read to reading to learn successfully. And they fall into 2 groups. One that's we call a struggling group, have very low grades. And notice the drop, quite pronounced drop from kind of a B grades down into C and D grades. Very low levels of all 3 types of engagement, but okay on the mental health side. Then you have the alienated students. These are students that have a very high probability of dropping out of school. Low on all factors. So what we kind of see ourselves doing at the Learning Bar in a way is doing action research in 3,000 schools across the country. It's roughly the number of schools that participated this past year. We say action research is because we're really trying to build up our tools to get schools using these data in practical ways. One of the tools that we introduced a couple years ago is our thematic reports. The thematic reports are written to a very tight format. We give a little description of what the issue is. We talk about some of the key findings from research, and then we say, we're going to show you the data for your school. So we talk about then these various assets to school completion, and then we show for your school what percentage of kids had a high probability of completion, a moderate probability of completion, and a low probability of completion. And so here you'll see a school that's got a lot of kids in the high group, but then a fair number here and quite a few down in the low group. And you can compare that then to national norms. We then bring in the 5 types of students and show what percentage of students, the graph at the bottom shows what percentage are engaged, disconnected, disengaged, and so on. And this is a new feature that's different from the previous thematic report of 2 years ago. We had so many calls from the school saying, you talk about these 5 types of students, but you don't actually show them. And that's because we hadn't quite figured out how to do that in our promise of getting results back to you in 2 days. But we've now, with our brilliant tech team, have figured out how to do that, and so that's in the thematic report. And those 5 types of students, I think it's important to think about them that way, because some of the students, especially the disconnected and disengaged, really would benefit more from school-wide reforms. Those are reforms aimed at helping all students in the school, whereas the struggling and alienated students would benefit more from more targeted reforms. And that's what's described in the last page of the report. So in thinking about action research in 3,000 schools, then, one of the first things is building assets with school-wide reforms, focusing on engagement, developing caring schools through smaller learning communities, cross-grade teams, and so on. Developing an early warning system. Remember that most of the children, well, not most of them, but a large percentage of the children, about a quarter of them, who are at risk of not completing school, that's evident back in grade 3, grade 4, or really back in kindergarten. And so we like to have an early warning system using the early years evaluation, and that's set into this so-called responsive tiered instruction framework, or you'll see it in the literature called response to intervention. We like to, because it's a leading indicator, we like to call it responsive tiered instruction. You can also take provincial test results, and rather than focusing on how well your school's ranking, say which kids are at, if you can get it into the 5 PISA levels, level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which kids are at risk and what are we going to do with those kids? Attendance and behavior markers are also important. In most schools, on an average school, a typical school, you'd have about 25% of your students that have low engagement. They're low achievers, kids with behavior problems, children with anxiety and depression. School leaders really need to know who they are and regularly monitor their progress. In the thematic report, I refer to this popular U.S. program called Check and Connect, which is a intervention. It's really focuses more on that struggling and, well, mostly on the alienated group, really. It's for kids who are really at high risk of dropping out. Also, getting staff to look at some of the early warning signs of withdrawal. Remember that group called the quiets, what Michelle Janos called the quiets. Identify advocates for disengaged students. An advocate isn't someone who sits down and does the homework for the child, but an advocate is someone who makes sure the right kinds of resources are brought to bear for a child. And when we ask students about an advocate at school, the disengaged students most often do not have an advocate they can turn to for advice. We also have a set of measures on, we call our healthy schools measures, and it's interesting when you look at kids' participation in risky behaviors, and especially drug use, if they indicate they're using a drug like marijuana or some drug like cocaine, then they're filtered into a number of other questions, and we look at whether their extent of use would suggest they may be addicted. Those who may be addicted, we ask them who they would turn to for help. Most often it's not a parent, it's not an adult at school, sometimes a friend at school, but most often they say that I'd try to fix it myself. And so really having an advocate at school is very important. Those advocates also can help develop a long-term plan for school success. Help students become affiliated with school through clubs, sports, volunteer activities, or other school events. Imagine if you had a school in your school division or school district that said, our main focus is to make sure every single child participates in at least one sport or club. Almost part of the curriculum. What a difference that would make. Would I send my child there? Absolutely. Implement an intervention to build literacy skills. Remember, you've got about 25% to 30% of students are struggling readers, and those are the most vulnerable to being disengaged from school and the most vulnerable to dropping out of school. Building literacy skills for those students is far more important than subject matter content. Check in daily with students that display behavioral problems, help them develop strategies for problem solving, celebrate small successes, help develop positive friendships. And when I say check in daily, you almost need to start, have them check in the morning, which would be a kind of a check and connect type intervention. Check in the morning, make a plan for the day, go over what they've got, try to identify the hot buttons where they're most likely to get into trouble. Develop effective programs to deal with bullying, exclusion, and sexual harassment. And as those of you who are using Tell Them From Me will know that we have a more extended measure of student bullying that leads to another thematic report on bullying, school safety, and harassment. And finally, develop school-wide and individual interventions to help those suffering anxiety and depression. Equip students with the skills to develop emotional resilience, developing positive friendships, coping with difficult situations, positive thinking, resolving conflicts. And then you'll get a small number of kids who also need professional help, and make sure those children get the help they need. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
This concludes our first segment. Now we move on to segment 2. Once again, my name is Landry with the Learning Bar, and I'll be sharing how you can utilize the Tell Them From Me reporting features to look at some of the measures used in school completion. Let's start by taking a look at what measures you need in order to populate the thematic report on school completion. By design, the measures included fall under the domains of social and emotional outcomes, academic outcomes, drivers of student outcomes, and demographic factors. As you can see from this infographic, the X indicates the measures under these domains that needed to be selected. For example, under the social and emotional outcomes domain, you can see that the X is placed by the measure areas that are included and needed to populate the report. By choosing this focus area on school completion, a district coordinator in a district selects the measures during survey composing, which is a stage of designing and building the survey that will be used by all the schools in the jurisdiction. You can also see that an estimated time to complete is available, and it shows the survey would take 26 minutes using the 95th percentile. Also of note, this focus area is only available for the secondary schools. Of course, to be able to access your reports, you first need to log in to Tell Them From Me, and then can access your reports by using two easy portal sites, either through the Monitor Progress or View Reports portal. All reports available can be quickly accessed from this dashboard. Using the Tell Them From Me one-click report, you can see a summary of all of your survey results and get a good feel as to how your district or school did on different measures overall. So the one-click report is a good tool to start your data exploration using the school completion measures, for example. To remind all of you, the one-click reports show all survey results by measure. Using the example provided here, I can quickly see that my students are just slightly below the Canadian norm in regards to sense of belonging. The Canadian norm should be used as a benchmark, and is not something I should necessarily be striving for, but does suggest where the school sits with other Canadian schools and provides a reference point. The text on the left of the chart suggests that both my male and female students have a lower sense of belonging compared to the Canadian average. By making this observation, I know that this is something I may need to focus on in terms of school completion. Now that I've identified through using the one-click report, the further investigation is needed under the sense of belonging measure, I can use the powerful and dynamic interactive chart tool to provide more information using drill downs. Once your students' surveys have closed and reports are available, measures that relate to school completion are reported in their own individual charts within the dynamic interactive chart tool. This allows you to dissect the factors that affect school completion at more of a micro level. On this slide, I have used sense of belonging once again as an example. Here, I drill down the measure by sex and grade, and as such, it allows me to see and look deeper into what might be going on behind this measure and to give further context and understanding of the data as it was reported by the students. So in this case, the drill downs allow you the ability to uncover what might be going on with a subpopulation of students and allow you to target interventions accordingly. Remember, the data is not the answer, but more so information to have meaningful discussions with your school teams. Please keep in mind that any data you may see on these slides comes from our demo district, so it's not any particular school or district's data. In regards to all our measures, not just the measures of school completion, the key is to regularly survey your students in order to gain insight into which areas you should be celebrating, as well as identifying areas in which you may need to adjust. A suggestion to maximize success would be to adopt the notion of completing 2 snapshots within a school year. That is to say, you can survey your students in the fall, analyze your data, and apply the results to your school improvement planning. Then, in the spring, survey your students again using a subset of identified measures to see which interventions were successful and which areas still need work. School completion may need a longer time frame to see growth. You can apply our year-over-year comparison to this measure, a function you can perform in the interactive charts. You can compare up to 3 years' worth of data, so long as you continually choose to survey on the same measure. By applying this comparison, you can see how your school has improved over several years, which is terrific for long-term improvement planning. These are just a few examples of how you can use the Tell Them For Me reporting tools to track your school's school completion levels. We do encourage you to utilize our reports so that you can, too, see the story your students are trying to tell you. Further to this, the Account Success Management team at the Learning Bar does offer debriefing sessions, which provides more detailed support in examining your data. If this is a service you are interested in, please connect with your Account Success Manager. Finally, I would like to offer that the scrapbook tool within Tell Them For Me can provide you with an easy-to-use framework for sharing data and creating powerful presentations. Within the Tell Them For Me environment, it is the feedback loops, communication to your stakeholders, and using the data for discussion and such that can maximize the overall power and perception of the tool as not just another survey, but a tool for change, student voice, and a part of planning that students, teachers, and parents learn to appreciate. So a few quick nuggets on Scrapbook would be that it can be personalized, downloaded to a PDF, zip, or PowerPoint for quick and easy sharing and presenting. By working in the interactive charts, you can click on the camera icon to collect charts that are of interest to you. While in an interactive chart, clicking on the question mark reveals information behind the measure and can also be included in your downloads to provide the audience with more texture and behind-the-scenes information on a particular measure. This and other tools and supports are available to all members of Tell Them For Me, and we look forward to working with you and sharing this with you. That brings me to the end of my portion of today's session on school completion. And now for our guest and member presenters, Karen Penny and Mark Owens, who will share with you what they have done to raise the bar in school completion in Peace River School Division, which is one of our member divisions from Alberta.
I chose this picture to start our presentation today on raising the bar, as this is the vista that the Peace River High School students have every day when they are working in the school library. Just a beautiful view of the Peace River Valley to start our presentation off today. So a little bit more about the school division. Peace River School Division is situated in the northwest corner of Alberta. It stretches 13,000 kilometers from Menno Simons in the west to Red Earth Creek in the east, Manning in the north, and Nampa in the south. There are approximately 3,100 students from kindergarten to grade 12 enrolled in 20 Peace River School Division schools. In addition, there are 2 Mennonite colonies that are administered by the school division. Peace River School Division has been experiencing a 1% decline in student enrollment, and will continue this trend until at least 2015. Employment in the region consists of farming, oil and gas, and subsidiary businesses to these industries. Like most regions in the north, the school division is experiencing an increase in the number of First Nation and Métis students, as well as Mennonite families moving into the area. The slide you are looking at right now is the Accountability Pillar report each school division in Alberta receives each October and May that reports on 16 measures of school improvement. This report was used as the basis for beginning our work in raising the bar for high school completion. If you'll notice here, I know it's maybe a little distorted, but we're looking at the dropout rate here, which in the past years has sat at 5.4 with a 3-year average of 5.9. We're currently sitting at 3.2% dropout rate, which is slightly lower than the province. This report has been used as the basis for beginning our work in raising the bar for high school completion. I'll briefly review the 3 strategies we are currently working on to ensure students are staying in school and completing high school. Strategy 1 is tracking student progress. Peace River School Division has 9 small high schools, including 2 outreach campuses, representing 809 students. Each comes with its own set of unique features, from small rural profiles with 20 students to larger rural settings with 300 students. Recognizing that high school completion is a fundamental building block on which other educational and life goals are built, and recognizing that the division's profile for dropout rate was among the highest in the province, sitting at 38 out of 63 school divisions, high school completion became a focus for us. We reviewed early school leavers research to gain a better understanding of what we were facing, and then the strategies from the Alberta Education Strategic Framework were reviewed to provide direction. The strategic framework contained 5 strategies to choose from. They were student engagement, successful transitions, collaborative partnerships, positive connections, and tracking progress. In the fall of 2009, I began working with the high school principals on strategy number 5, tracking progress. The group believed that although each strategy held merit, it would be through the identification of at-risk students that we would be able to better understand the needs of these students and address those needs according to each school's profile. Supporting documentation and/or projects consisted of the Accountability Pillar reports and the Tell Them From Me project measuring student engagement. Based on the Early School Leavers report, we recognized that there were a number of indicators we could use to determine barriers and ultimately provide supports for these students. We've been collecting data since the spring of 2010 and have been faithfully reviewing it to identify at-risk students. The form displayed for you here shows the categories we looked at in tracking student progress. These categories have changed over time as we have gained more skills in recognizing the signs of early school leavers. I'll ask Mark to describe the process he follows for tracking progress.
Thank you, Karen. When we started meeting as a group, as a professional learning community, with our admin association meetings with the high school administrators, we really looked at this high school completion in the beginning of this. It enabled us to look at common indicators for students that led to high school dropout or non-completion of high school. In talking in these sessions, we were able to eliminate some of the columns and really focus down to some of the indicators that really helped us to be proactive in our journey to get these students to graduate, and has been now the cornerstone of where we've started in tracking progress through high school for students.
Thank you, Mark. The next slide you're looking at is strategy number 2, and it centers around universal programming, not only in the emotional, social, behavioral domains, but also in the academic domain. Information gleaned from the Tell Them From Me surveys indicated a high need for universal supports in both areas. We were already moving forward with a mental health capacity building project in the Peace River Community Schools, but recognized that we had other schools needing the same type of supports. We embarked upon a campaign for community partnerships to provide supports in all of our schools. To date, we have had partnerships with Alberta Health Services, Family and Community Support Services, the Municipality of Clare Hills County, and the Town of Peace River to hire youth education support, or YES workers, to provide supports for students in our schools. In addition, Figure 4 shows that students have a high expectation of success. This has been fostered by a transformation towards inclusive education, or an education system that works on students' strengths and is flexible and responsive to all students' needs. As well, when you look at Figure 6 above, you'll note that a high number of students believe they have an advocate at school, someone to look out for them and help them deal with the pressures of everyday life. This next slide illustrates the work performed by the Success and Yes coaches in our schools. 85% of the work they do is grounded in universal programming, while 10% is targeted and 5% is specialized. We are fortunate to have a wide range of dedicated workers in our division. In addition, teachers play a large role in focusing on student-centered programming in our schools. Mark will be able to better illustrate this point with a few examples from his school. Mark?
Thank you, Karen. In our school, we were able to move from the traditional model of trying to help one individual student at a time with individual issues and problems that they're having in their journey through high school. What we were able to now do with the response to intervention model is looking at groups of students with similar needs. We were able to break it down into attendance, academic, and social emotional issues. And when we looked at it in this fashion, this enabled us to take students with similar needs and help to start programs that targeted more than one individual student. We were able to help multiple students at a time. We have programs, this sparked programs such as Lunch with a Bunch, which is a group of students with some social emotional needs that are able to meet as a group together and be able to talk and feel comfortable in their situations. And we also have our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit worker that has taken groups of students that have struggled as far as fitting in the school and fitting in with groups, and have a support group that works together to not only meet their social and emotional needs, but start to meet their academic needs. So looking at it in this type of model, we were able to help more students all at once with similar needs.
Thank you, Mark. Strategy 3 is partnerships with industry. Because Peace River School Division is made up of small schools, our ability to offer a wide range of programs to meet all student needs is very challenging. The data we gleaned from both the Accountability Pillar surveys and the Tell Them From Me surveys indicated that students wanted more course offerings at their schools. In addition, the Board of Trustees engages its communities in face-to-face conversations every 2 years. In 2010, this process saw the board meeting with people from 6 of our communities and receiving an overwhelming response to partnership offerings for student programming, particularly but not limited to the areas of trades training. Mark will share some of the work that occurs between businesses and the Peace River High School over the last few years.
Our relationships with our business community and the Peace River community has been crucial to having our students successful and through their high school journey. Work Experience is one of the programs that we run that has students working in local businesses and getting experience in industries, as well as earning credits towards their graduation. With the Work Experience, they are able to meet the needs that they're facing with earning a wage and be able to support themselves through their high school. The Registered Apprenticeship Program is a program that works with the trades industry and has our students working either part-time or full-time for a semester in the trades, getting their first 1,000 hours of apprenticeship. And we have students working all over the place in our community in trades such as electrician and millwright and welding, and as well now into aesthetics, cosmetology, and looking into some cooking as well. With the Registered Apprenticeship Program, students are able to work out into the industry, and when they are finished their 1,000 hours and into graduation, go straight to school and into their second year apprenticeship. It gives them a head start into their careers following high school. The Power Engineering Program, run with 3 of our oil field companies in the area, DMI, Shell, and Penn West, and with our Northern Lakes College, is enabling students to start in the summer of grade 10 and work through upon graduation in the final summer into earning their 4th class power engineering and starting straight into a career at 18 years old, graduating high school. Not only with these programs, we also have industry coming into the schools and helping us with our programs. A good example of that is our cosmetology program, new to us 2 years, that has one of our local salon owners being the instructor of that program and helping the teacher instruct with very current, up-to-date things in the industry. We have very good relationships. Fairview High School, a partnership with the Grand Prairie College, and Harley-Davidson with small engine repair, has one of the leading programs in northwestern Canada. And these partnerships with the industry enabled us to keep the students that have traditionally dropped out to go to work and get their graduation and move on to careers.
Thank you, Mark. To sum up how we've managed to raise the bar on high school completion in Peace River School Division, we made use of the available research on early school leavers and high school completion. We used the data provided to us by Alberta Education Accountability Pillar surveys and the Tell Them For Me surveys. We started with a small focus and expanded as we moved forward, and we partnered with agencies and businesses to provide better supports for our students. The work that we've done, in large part using the Tell Them For Me surveys, has enabled us to really live out our vision, which is learning together, success for all. Thank you.
So thank you to our 2 guest speakers, Karen Penny and Mark Owens, who shared with us some of their examples and best practices around school completion. So before we end today's session, I just want to draw your attention to these particular websites that you see on your screen. Dr. Willms talked specifically about Check and Connect, and the other 2 would draw your attention simply to tellthemforme.com, which is your site accessing your data, and also the Learning Bar website. Thank you all for your time today, and we hope you enjoyed this session and webinar on school completion. It is our mission to show global leadership in enhancing the life chances of children and youth by providing reliable student, teacher, and parent voice to school improvement efforts using actionable online survey information. Thank you very much.